Okay, this lecture is on the nitrogen cycle. The nitrogen cycle is the most abundant element. Does anybody know how much of nitrogen is in the atmosphere, percentage-wise?
62%.
Close, close, 78%. And then you have oxygen is about 21%. So it's the most abundant. But you cannot use nitrogen in the form that it's in, which is N2 in the atmosphere. So we have to change it. The acronym behind me goes through the process as well as your results or your product for each of the steps, and you need to memorize these for the AP exam. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead. You should have the picture in front of you, so at least you can have a visualization of what I'm talking about, because I don't have it on the board. But I believe it's, what, 73, perhaps? Okay, we're going to go ahead and start with nitrogen fixation, because we know that nitrogen starts off with N2, which is a gas, and that first process is called nitrogen fixation, so pretty much we need to fix nitrogen. So we're kind of going from N2 to something. Okay. And does anybody want to guess what we're making? Close. What? Ammonia? Yes, we are making ammonia. Okay, and that ammonia is going to be an NH3. But we still can't use this, or plants cannot utilize ammonia. We cannot see kind of this process, but we can see this process if we look at water samples. Remember the other day you guys were taking samples of ammonia. Okay, we can test this to see where our, if we're in ammonification or not. Well, how can we do this? Well, going from fixing it, we have special bacteria. Examples might be a cyanobacteria, very important to know. So cyanobacteria can fix that nitrogen. Some other plant bacteria consist of, maybe you've heard of before, called rhizomes. You have a symbiotic relationship where there's nodules on the bottom of the plant. That's going to help or fix that the nitrogen in order to absorb it in the plant, whereas the plant is offering that bacteria a place to live and increases the surface area of it. It has little nodules on the bottom. So that's going to be the first step. Or you might have NH4, so I'm just going to kind of put here, or NH4. The next step here is going to be nitrification. And this step is going to be a biotic process. Is it biotic? Nope, pardon me, abiotic. Where this step is a biotic process. And that's because of the bacteria. But in this case, this is an abiotic process, and we are going and converting that ammonia to nitrates and nitrites. I put an asterisk next to the NO3 because that's the one that we want. It does produce some nitrites, but this is toxic to plants, so plants are not going to use that one. But it is produced. And this is, again, called nitrate. Any questions so far? So right now we have our fix, ammonia, and nitrification. Abiotic process makes nitrates. Now we can use that. And we go through that. This next process is called assimilation. What does assimilate mean? Huh? Yes, to bring together, to build. So what do we need to build? What are things that you remember from biology that need nitrogen that we need to build? Think of the basic unit of life. Huh? That's not the basic unit. What are you made up of that needs nitrogen? Starts with a D. Very good. DNA. Okay. Nitro. What is it again? Thank you. Ribonucleic acid. tongue-tied. With those, you have your nitrogen bases. That's a huge building block. So you do need that. So what is the product? You have your DNA. What do I have? And pan. You get proteins. These are P stands for proteins. DNA or RNA. And here, consumers, so we're building these, right, for our producers. Consumers get these proteins by eating your producers. So that's how it's assimilated going up your food chain. The next one that is now, if we're done with this, let's say your plants die, your animals die, we need to get that back up into the atmosphere. Well, we can't just take how it's in, we have to change it back. So that process is called ammonification again. And what do you think we're going to make? So we're taking the nitrogen that this is in, we're going through a process called ammonification. So what do you think we are making? Very good, ammonia. And this is going to be in NH4. Now this is something that is very important to remember. This nitrogen molecule, as you are going to be nitrogen molecules, you may travel in this pathway and now you're here. But guess what? We're in NH3 or NH4. We can go back up here and start that process all over again. Because we can take that ammonia and go through nitrification to get more nitrates. So that's another way that it cycles. Decomposers are going to be breaking these down into that biological nitrogen. So you have more decomposers. So think of your detritivores. Think of that and more bacteria. And lastly, if that nitrogen is going to be going back up into the atmosphere, again, we still cannot go in the state that it's in, is nitrogen, ammonia. We have to go through, does anybody know what this might be? Very good, denitrification. So it has to get back up to N2 or nitrous dioxide, which will eventually become N2 gas. And again, this is where you have bacteria in oxygen poor soils, as well as stagnant water is going to change your ammonia, denitrify it into either N2O, which is nitrous dioxide, or excuse me, nitrous oxide, or N2. And eventually that will become N2 as well. So this is the whole process of the nitrogen cycle. Well, how are humans, what is this human activity that we have? It's huge. We are putting more fertilizers with nitrogen into the atmosphere because of that fertilizer itself. We are synthetically making more fertilizers. If you guys go to Home Depot or go to Lowe's, you're going to see these synthetic fertilizers. So with regards to nitrogen, it's farming practices. We fix more nitrogen than all of this naturally combined because of the synthetic fertilizers. So we are putting more into the atmosphere. And so, but what is the so what factor? Okay, so if you guys can think of this, is that think of an ecosystem. An ecosystem of certain plants may have a low tolerance for a certain type of nitrogen. They live off of low levels, which that should be fine because that's what they've adapted for. But now you have a whole bunch of high levels coming in. Plants are thriving. They cannot compete with that species. So they either die out or they leave. And they did this case study in the United States with just that, is that they planted a field with no nitrogen fertilizers, and then they had nitrogen for a whole bunch of nitrogen fertilizers. What they found is that they had a 40% decrease with the nitrogen fertilizers because they could not compete with the thriving plants. They were growing larger for space, and they could not compete with that. And so there was a decrease of that biodiversity because of the high amounts of nitrogen. So as farming, we are adding to that problem. They contaminate the water. There's a couple words that I'm going to be throwing at you right now that we'll use later, and this is called eutrophication. Eutrophication is when there's abundance of nutrients in the water. And if nutrients are great for plant growth, right? So if we have too much plant growth, it's going to become toxic later on. And that's called eutrophication. We have cultural eutrophication and natural. And we'll talk about that more in agriculture. So that's one. And then deforestation. Okay, in deforestation, we're going to be releasing nitrogen into the atmosphere by clear cutting, because those two have nitrogen trapped into the trees. So those are some things that humans do. It's a crucial component. Again, you can't absorb the nitrogen directly, so you have to go through this process. And again, the biggest thing is that we fix, the biggest thing that humans do is that we fix more nitrogen than all of this combined naturally. So that is it.